The year was 221 BC. Yingjiang, the king of Qin, looked upon his creation and he saw that it was good. In 9 years, he had finally ended 5.5 centuries of savage internecine conflict and united the Middle Kingdom under one rule. Yingjiang himself had been defined by that age of war. His birth was shaped by possibly the deadliest battle of antiquity. He had grown up in a world where everyone around him either hated him or schemed to use him for their own gain. His throne had been won in the face of a plot against his life. Assassin after assassin had sought to end him. Even now, at the height of his power and glory, there was no security against it coming undone and falling back into the chaos from which he and his armies had wrested it. And so, this man, this tyrannical, paranoid, megalomaniacal man, would seek to crush the world he knew into dust beneath the weight of his will. And then he would remake it according to his singular vision. It was a vision that ultimately drove him to madness and inflicted an Orwellian reign of terror upon his hapless subjects. And yet the vision would outlive him and outlive his dynasty. It was a vision burned into the minds and souls of an entire civilization. Millennia of hatred and condemnation would never truly erase it. The scouring tides of revolution would fail to destroy it. The vision was Imperial China, and he was Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor. He is the pivotal character of this story, but it is not his alone. This is also the story of those who made his reign possible, those who sought to destroy him, those who shared his vision, and those who brought the Qin Dynasty to ruin. Assuming the veracity of the available sources, Lu Buwei was born in the early 290s BC in Puyang, a city that still exists in China today. By then, the land the people called Zhongguo, the Middle Kingdom, had been at war with itself for over half a millennium. The kings of the Qin Dynasty, once masters of the land, had long shown themselves to be impotent rulers, unable to keep the peace between feudal lords who perpetually struggled for domination. Lu Buwei grew up to be a merchant, and a highly successful one. By the late 250s BC, he was in his early 30s and had amassed a considerable fortune buying and selling goods, both in his home kingdom of Wei and its warring neighbors. A charmed life, considering the times in which he lived, and yet it seemed that he remained unsatisfied with his lot. And he may have had reason to be so. Like many cultures pre-Adam Smith, the ancient Chinese had a very primitive understanding of economics and commercial value. To the ancient mind, a merchant did not produce goods like farmers and artisans, nor provide services like laborers, soldiers, and officials. Instead, merchants merely bought what others had produced and then sold them at dishonestly hiked up prices. Thus, a merchant was little more than a parasite, insinuating himself between producer and consumer and somehow tricking both sides into thinking that his work was necessary. As a consequence, this traditional perception, long since codified by the teachings of Confucius, placed the merchant at the bottom of society, making someone even as wealthy as Lu Buwei the social inferior of farmers and peasant laborers. While historical evidence demonstrates that this particular precept of Confucian doctrine was honored more in the breach than in the observance, it is certainly true that the commercial class was often viewed with mistrust and disdain by most of Chinese society, especially by the Confucian-educated officials that would dominate imperial policy and scholarship for the next 2 millennia. Thus, while Lu Buwei could obtain fine silk clothes, concubines, and all the other creature comforts attainable for a man of antiquity, no amount of money could buy the one thing he desired above all else: respect. The first-century military and political treatise Annals of the Warring States relates a likely fictitious but not implausible conversation between the merchant and his father. Lu Buwei asked Lu Sr. what profit he could expect from investing in agriculture. 10-fold was the reply. And from investing in selling jade and pearls, 100-fold. What about investing in the establishment of a new ruler? Such profit would be incalculable. Thus, Lu Buwei resolved to shift his career path from business to politics. It would be a hard task for one of his disreputable background, but whether in antiquity or today, one does not become as successful as Lu Buwei without an eye for opportunity. According to the 1st century BC historian Sima Qian, it was while doing business in Handan, the capital of the state of Zhao, that Lu Buwei spied his opportunity in the form of a young man named Ying Yiren. During this era of chaos, known as the Warring States period, it was customary for states at peace to exchange hostages of noble or even royal blood as guarantors of said peace. Ying Yiren was just such a political hostage, a grandson of Zhao Xiang, the king of Qin, arguably the most powerful of the 7 warring states. Despite this, when Lu Buwei first met him, Yiren was not treated well by the Zhao elites. They did not harm or abuse him, but neither did they accord him the respect or degree of comfortable living appropriate to a man of royal blood. His robes were shabby by aristocratic standards, his royal carriage was plain, his quarters comparatively austere, and he had neither friends nor important contacts of any kind in the Zhao capital. In a culture where polygamy was acceptable and commonplace, especially among the elites, a man could father hordes of potential heirs. Yiren had the bad luck of being one of 20 sons of a man who was himself a lesser son of King Zhao Xiang. In short, he was completely disposable as a hostage, and the Zhao court knew it. What possible opportunity could Lu Buwei have seen in such a man? A few years ago, he likely would not have looked twice at Yiren, but in 267 BC, something had happened to tip the scales of opportunity. Prince Dao, eldest son and heir apparent of King Zhao Xiang, had died suddenly without issue. The king had responded by elevating Yiren's father Angguo to the status of crown prince. Even so, under ordinary circumstances, most men would have balked at the long odds of placing a son who was neither the eldest nor the youngest of his father's heirs in line for the throne of Qin. But Lu Buwei knew that the circumstances were not ordinary. The new crown prince may have had 20 sons, but not a single one had been born of his primary wife, a noblewoman formerly from the state of Chu named Huaiyang. The sources insist that Prince Angguo loved and doted upon Huaiyang. The fact that she retained her status as first wife despite her childlessness certainly seems to support that claim. And it was in this perfect combination of dynastic circumstances that Lu Buwei had seen his opportunity. Sima Qian scripts this first meeting with banter that actually manages to retain some of its wit in the translation, a remarkable feat for any ancient historian. Lu Buwei breaks the ice by saying, "I know how to enlarge your gate for you." Yiren ruefully replies, "You'd better enlarge your own gate before you worry about mine." To which the merchant responds, "You don't understand. The enlarging of my gate depends on the enlarging of yours." Thus began one of the most consequential partnerships in Asian history. However Lu Buwei's first meeting with Yiren really went down, the merchant was able to convince the younger man that he had a plan to give Yiren the keys to his grandfather's kingdom, and that he was willing to use most if not all of his wealth to make it happen. Yiren accepted. Whether or not he actually promised to, quote, divide his kingdom and share it with Lu Buwei, as Sima Qian claims, is debatable. Deal in place, Lu Buwei gave Yiren 500 units of gold in order to purchase himself a higher living standard and make connections in Handan so as to boost his image. A second 500 he took with him to Xianyang, the capital of Qin, for his first real dive into politics. A generous application of gold managed to get Lu Buwei a meeting, not with Princess Huaiyang, but with her sister and brother. Selling a plan requires as much of a silver tongue as with any other merchandise, and Lu Buwei put that asset to good use. With Huaiyang's siblings acting as go-betweens, the merchant made the case that Huaiyang should adopt Yiren, making him Prince Angguo's heir. He correctly pointed out that, without offspring of her own, Huaiyang's position at court was entirely dependent on her husband's favor. She was aging, and there was always the risk that Angguo might choose to elevate one of his other consorts over her. Even if that didn't happen, Huaiyang was certain to lose her status once the crown prince died, for none of his sons had any loyalty to her over their own mothers. Lu Buwei insisted that Yiren was a good and righteous young man, and, despite being a political hostage, and thanks to Lu Buwei's gold, a well-connected one. He argued that if Huaiyang were to adopt him, Yiren would be ever so grateful to her and would ensure that she retained her high status even after his father's death. How long these negotiations dragged on, we'll never know, but Huaiyang's siblings were definitely persuaded by Lu Buwei, and in turn, they persuaded their sister. Huaiyang then approached Prince Angguo and secured his approval to adopt Yiren. As a way of emphasizing that he was now her son, Huaiyang gave Yiren a new name, Zichu, the son of Chu, a tribute to her former homeland. One can only imagine Lu Buwei's jubilation. He had invested nearly all he had on a roll of the dice, and Lady Luck had just handed him the jackpot. As quickly as possible, he brought the good news back to Handan and the anxious ears of Prince Zichu. A great feast was held in celebration, and the piju flowed freely. As part of the entertainment, Lu Buwei brought in his concubines to dance for the attendees. And then she walked in, and once more the current of destiny was altered. Her name has been lost to history. All we are left with is the appellation Lady Zhao. Such was her beauty and grace that Zichu found himself spellbound. So smitten did he become that the prince expressed the desire to have her for himself. Lu Buwei, unwilling to alienate the man he'd invested so much in, consented. And within a year of that fateful party, Prince Zichu and Lady Zhao welcomed a bouncing baby boy into the world. Though scholars continue to argue over exactly what his name would have been, given the complexities of ancient Chinese naming conventions, the historical records would generally remember him as Yingzheng. Later historians like Sima Qian would claim that Lady Zhao was already pregnant by Lu Buwei by the time she became Zichu's consort. But in a society where bloodline and lineage were of the highest importance, this claim is laughably hard to swallow. Women who became the consorts of noble and royal houses were subjected to thorough, albeit primitive, examinations to determine such things as pregnancy and virginity. The idea that the cunning and devious Lu Buwei would simultaneously be foolish enough to think he could pull off such a scam? Not impossible, but very, 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 very unlikely. But like all Confucian scholars, Sima Qian detested the Qin Dynasty and the first emperor. How better to besmirch that legacy than to insist that Yingzheng was not only illegitimate, but was also the son of a lowly merchant. As for Zichu, he soon had greater concerns than posthumous claims of cuckoldry. Around the time that the prince first laid eyes on Lady Zhao, events were conspiring to threaten all his and Lu Buwei's careful planning, and forever shape the kind of man that his son would turn out to be.